Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are back and we are ready to roll. This is a session all around trust. We touched on it in the very first session in here this afternoon, but last year we had a really wonderful session which Doug Wood moderated and had a bunch of brands with him to talk about what was really happening in terms of trust. Now, Doug has been doing a great bit of work with the ANA and working out how do we solve this problem of transparency and trust within media. So, without further ado, let me welcome your host, which is Douglas Wood, the partner at Reed Smith. Let's give him a round of applause. Yes, come on, guys. I know it's the afternoon. The next fine panelist is Sarah Mansfield, who is the VP of Global Media at Unilever. I'm just messing up the order on purpose now. I'm just teasing with everyone. Our third panelist is Hasan, Arik, who is the founder and CEO of Redmill Solutions. Yes. And finally, and by no means least, although I've now messed up the AV schedule, it is Cecilia Borglund, who is the Global Media Manager for Volvo.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. And anything can be said about Jeremy is packing in a lot of content in a very small box. It's excellent. I hope you all enjoyed it. As Jeremy said, I'm Doug Wood. I'm General Counsel to the ANA, is one of my roles, and in that capacity, I've been in the midst of the trust and transparency debate ever since K2 came out with its report in 2016. And what we've seen in that time frame since 2016 is an increasing erosion of trust between brands and the ecosystem and the publishers and the consumers. The needle has not been going in the right direction. And in fact, what has been happening is a lot of fighting and a lot of complaining and a lot of angst between everyone in that entire spectrum. A couple of months ago, the ANA announced an initiative called the Trust Consortium. And the purpose of the Trust Consortium is to hopefully open a new chapter in this debate and find ways with an open tent with anybody who wants to have a serious conversation about the erosion of trust and ultimately the lack of growth that it ultimately entails when we don't have trust among one another, to come into that tent and have a real honest discussion about trust across all areas, not just the relationships between brands and agencies, but ultimately the relationship between brands and brand safety, between brands and the entire ecosystem that deals with digital fraud and the like, and ultimately to build up a trust with the consumer, because in the end of the day, that's all that really matters from a brand's and an ecosystem's perspective, because that's the ultimate source for growth in this industry is the consumer, how the consumer reacts. It is a little disconcerting that in the last Fortune 500 survey that was done, nearly half of the Fortune 500 companies actually had a decline in growth. That is an alarming fact when you think about it, that half of the largest corporations in the world are not seeing growth. So as Bob Liodice, who's the president and CEO of the ANA, said last week at a trust summit we had in New York, that he likens this industry, he now calls it Marketing Inc., as a big conglomerate whose purpose is to reach the consumer. And his reaction to talking about this at the summit was that if we all worked for Marketing Inc. the way we are now, we'd all probably be fired, because we're not ultimately delivering the thing we most need, and that is trust, all the way down through to the consumer. So what we put together today is a great panel of folks who understand two particular, or a number of key areas in that trust equation: the relationship with the consumer, the relationship with content, and the relationship with data. Those three things are the topics we're going to try to cover this afternoon. If we have time for questions, we'll be happy to answer them as best we can. But ultimately, those are the three things we want to cover today. If anyone wants to join the consortium, it's a global effort. Please see me. I'll give you the details, and you can be part of that conversation, as long as everyone in that consortium, again, as I said, wants to have an adult, honest conversation about the problems we're facing. But let's get on to the panel. Cecilia, let me start with you, all the way down there at the end. At Volvo, you've had a product that has had great reputation with consumers for decades and always had a trusting relationship with consumers. And as this ecosystem has evolved and digital has made this even more complicated for brands to instill that kind of trust in consumers, how have you at Volvo addressed that challenge of getting down to the consumer and maintaining, or better off, even increasing the trust that they have in your motor cars?
I mean, as you mentioned, trust is a hard thing, but in order to gain trust, I believe it's important to be honest, to be transparent, and that you're relevant to your community that you're talking towards. We actually see when we're looking at the consumer behavior for the car launches, that trust is a key part. And when people don't trust the brands, they go to their communities. So it's very important to tap into those communities and get to the values that are at the core of their hearts. You need to tap into their emotions, so otherwise you will never cut through the noise. So for us at Volvo, it's very important to be personal. We want our customers to feel that we understand them and that we provide solutions that are relevant to them. And we also take pride in our role within society and for the environment. With the Volvo Ocean Race, for instance, we had a lot of activities around cleaning the beaches. And we always put safety first. And you might not know this, but most of the crash dolls out there, they're made for men that are 180 centimeters tall. And a small person like me will probably be killed in the car. So what we're doing now is that we are launching crash test dolls that are gender neutral, so that everyone should be feeling safe. And that is one way of building trust, that you relate to a cause that is important to you as a company, and that we listen to our audience, and we build the trust from there.
Cecilia, let me ask you this. Part of that trust equation and getting to the consumer seems to be content. Everybody talks about content.
Sarah, by the way.
What? Sarah, I'm sorry. I mean, you were supposed to sit the other way originally,
Yes,
so
we were,
my mind had you positioned in a different way.
And I was about to answer that
I'm being
question.
transparent about that, by the way. I made a mistake.
Honesty is the best
That's
policy.
That's okay. That's okay. Anyway, at Unilever, you have a huge range of products and create an incredible amount of content and put a lot of it out there. How do you make that connection between your content and trust to the consumer, so the consumer really sort of hears your story in a way that is not interruptive, that they want to embrace, they want to listen to, as opposed to the new generation, particularly in the digital area, that seems to not want to hear from you at all?
Yeah. Well, I mean, setting the scene, first of all, I mean, advertising without trust is just noise. Simple as that. And when you come to a position where actually advertising executives are less than estate agents, you know you've got an issue. So for those that are in the UK, you know estate agents simply are the bottom of the bottom in terms of the level of trust. And generally consumers see advertising execs as less trustworthy than estate agents, which I find quite shocking. And there's obviously an increase in the amount of consumer mistrust in advertising, and content is a major contributor towards that. And you need to kind of drill down to exactly what the various different factors are that are impacting and affecting that. So kind of splitting that down. You've got obviously the rise of fake news, which is obviously generally undermining consumers' trust. Obviously that's not specifically advertising related, although there obviously is an issue in terms of our advertising appearing in context of any fake news. But also more specifically, advertising that's been seen to fund terrorism. So huge, great big headlines across press around that, continually erodes consumers' trust in advertisers. More and more we get asked the question as to, well, why do we advertise on Facebook? Why do we advertise on YouTube? When these channels, are in one way or another, showing and displaying terrorist content. So, these things are all factors that just undermine consumers' trust in advertising. Then you get on to personalisation. And a significant increase in the amount of personalisation. And it's not to say, against personalisation. Believe us, we're on a journey to come with more targeted and more relevant ads to our consumers. But, it has to be quality personalisation that really kind of, uses data and content smartly in combination with media, to get to the best outcome at the end of the day. And then you've got the issue of bombardment, which, I think someone mentioned the stat earlier in one of the other sessions that consumers see over 4,000 ads a day. And, and that proliferation of channels as well that they're seeing advertising across, and as more and more brands are putting more money into lower funnel advertising, retargeting, last click attribution. We've all had those ads that just follow you around the internet. That aren't particularly smart. And again, that undermines consumers' trust. combined with their general mistrust of how brands and platforms generally use their data, when they're seeing really, just blunt retargeting, that's just continually undermining people's trust all the time. However, I mean, I could go on and on and on, as sure as you guys could in the room as well. But that's at the end of the day, yes, we are the industry that is fueling that, and at some point we need to step back and we need to think about that and think about, okay, all right, what do we want to do as an industry to address that? Because it's not doing our advertising any good either in terms of the impact. It's now taking us a lot more advertising investment to deliver the cut through that we wanted to do from our advertising. So all round, we need to start addressing this issue in terms of what we do. Do you want me to go on? Shall I talk about
Listening to you almost makes me look back with great sort of comfort if we could go back to when there were 3 television networks and whatever it was. And the dilemma and the challenge for brands today is daunting, to put it mildly, to reach those consumers with the content that they want. And a lot of it is, as you said, is driven by data. And data seems to be, in everybody's mind. Who's going to own it? What are you going to do with it? How are you allowed to manipulate it? What are the rights of privacy? It's complicated with the GDPR and stuff that's going on in the United States now, in California, where all the insane people live and they do all sorts of crazy stuff. And they're about to come out with something even crazier than GDPR out there in California. But all of this creates this mess of data that we need to figure out what we can do with it, what really is important. Is it ownership? What is it that we need to really focus on? Hasan, you've been in that data arena for a long time, and you understand it as well, if not better than most. What do you think the challenge is in terms of brands looking at data, and how do they get the most out of it within this complicated ecosystem?
The question around data is quite a difficult one, because before you can decide who owns the data, who has rights to it, who should use it, how should you roll it up, whether it's okay to pass it on to other people, all these questions, underneath it all, you need to look at where the data is generated. And where the data is generated, there's a basic value exchange between the person who has the data and the person who wants to buy it. So if you go to a website and you consent to give your data, you're doing a value exchange for your data versus their content. Now, at the face of it, that seems very simple, right? So that website is now allowed to use your personal data. And now, if you kind of go a few steps further and say, okay, are they then allowed to sell it to a third party? Are they allowed to roll it up and start making all these business decisions? Now, that's where it gets really, really interesting and complicated. So for me, like GDPR has done for Europe, the consent during the day when the data is collected has to be incredibly clear that how the data is going to be used. And from that point onwards, you can then have a clear ownership of who owns it and who can use it. Now, if you take the data, if you look at the data, and that's the consumer data, if you look at the data and say, okay, there is a lot of commercial data that's generated between the advertiser who wants to spend on websites or other things, and also the media owner who has the content. So in that value exchange where the advertiser pays money, agency takes commission, and the media owner provides the actual value. Now, during that commercial transaction, there's a lot of data that's generated, right? And at the base of it, it'd be very easy to say, well, whoever paid the money owns the data as well as how that data should be used. But if you go down that route, you can then clearly see the problems around, okay, shouldn't an agency be allowed to roll up the data, take their learnings from the last car client that they had to the new one that they had, as well as the media owner being able to find better ways of using the advertising data. Now, in all those commercial transactions, it needs to be incredibly clear from the outset when you sign the contracts with your agencies and the media owners that not just the ownership of the data, is how the data should be used in the future, who should have access to it, should be incredibly clear. So for me, as somebody who mainly works on the advertiser side, of course I'm going to say the advertisers should always have full access to the data, and they should decide how that data is used in the future. But at the same time, having spent almost 20 years at the agencies, it'd be very unfair for me to say an agency should not be allowed to use that data in some shape or form for them to better serve their clients in general better. So the data question on the basic transaction is very simple, where the value exchange happens. But when it starts going into the second layers and the third layers in terms of how those are rolled up, especially at the group levels, like the holding companies, that becomes really, really tricky. How the advertisers, going back to your second part of your question, is how should the advertiser better use their data? For me, they need to, before they think about in-housing their media activity, they should be thinking about in-housing their media data. Now, it's only when you have access and control of your data can you then decide what you should do next. And it's those insights and the learnings will then give them the ability to, A, control their future data, as well as set up their future relationships with the suppliers.
You know, one of the things observations I have to that equation is I always try to think, how are new problems the same as the old problems? And how did we solve the old problems and maybe think about the new problems? And no one would argue that back in the day when the holding companies all sort of were formed and they had the collective clout to get the best possible prices from media owners, that we all embrace that. That's a good thing. They've got the money, they're putting it together, and they're getting us the best prices possible as brands. It's curious to me that when we then shift this over to data, and the agencies say, we want to be able to use all this data that we're accumulating from all of the brands we represent, anonymize it, and use that to better enhance your ability to target your consumers. It's a different reaction, because of this data paranoia that's out there about liabilities for use of data, who should own it. And it's really a function, as Hasan said, it's really a function of access, what access you're going to have, and then what access you're going to prevent others from having. And getting caught up in the debate of ownership can often get you down a rabbit's hole that misses the entire point. That said, there's also the adage, just because you can do it doesn't mean you ought to do it. And yesterday I saw a report that, and names will remain unstated, but there's actually a group looking into how to use DNA data that is readily available, through various DNA companies to target advertising and personalize it based upon your DNA. Yeah, you could do it, but I can guarantee you, from a regulatory standpoint, there's not going to be a great reaction to that. And from a consumer standpoint, if you really want to instill trust in consumers, I think that's a really bad road to go down as well. But that's the other part of the data problem, is that there are really smart people who know how to manipulate data, accumulate data, and target consumers that really goes so far that it's a huge challenge for brands and those in the ecosystem to say, hold on, let's back this up a little bit and not get over the edge where we're going to have worse consequences from that than we anticipated. One of those trust factors, and I'd love all three of you to comment on this, that we see in the marketplace right now is the so-called in-housing. That we're seeing that increasingly there seems to be some evidence that brands are bringing functions in-house. Now, they always had functions in-house, so the idea of having in-house is in and of itself not some unique concept. But it seems to be getting a lot of press about bringing more in-house. And the press seems to say that one of the reasons that this is being brought in-house is a lack of trust. It keeps coming back to the word trust in this industry being so lacking. So I'm curious if any of you have comments about what do you think of that supposed trend or new move to bring functions in-house that were traditionally outside? Sarah?
I'm not sure whether it's always down to a lack of trust. I think sometimes it makes smart business to do so. If I think, going back to your point, Hasan, on owning your data, we're on a journey to develop 1 billion connections with our consumers, by 2020. Just because it makes smart sense for us to own a relationship with our consumers. So to be able to understand our consumers better, be able to segment them better, target them better, and be able and just be more in control of our destiny. It's less to do with trust. It's more to do with good business sense from my perspective.
But you also need to bear in mind the challenge of doing that, because it's one thing to do it maybe if you have a company in New York, but if you're based in, let's say, Gothenburg, Sweden, it's really, really hard to get the right kind of talent. So you need to be humbled by the fact that it's quite hard to get the right talent. So maybe you can in-house some parts, but maybe not all. So you have that as part of the equation when you look at the whole picture.
Well, for me, it's a bit of both. I agree with you that there are many, many good commercial reasons why a lot of the advertisers choose to bring some stuff in-house. With the digital, obviously, it's become a lot more accessible. So you can bring the teams in-house. You don't have to go through the agencies to be able to purchase media activity. So that clearly was one of the big reasons. On the other side, I think it was the advertisers who ended up creating this strange trading model where agencies make their money through many, many different ways. And I don't need to sit here and spell out what those are, but it's because that's become really, really public with the various studies, and that the people started asking the questions, hang on a second, so my agency makes money through my fees, through my commission, ABBs, blah, blah, blah. Maybe I should just bypass them all and start buying in-house. And I think it's a combination of those two. And it's depending on what the advertiser that we work with, depending on where they stand in terms of those relationships, as well as their ability to execute the campaigns themselves, people have definitely taken some steps. But I also agree with you that it has all the usual challenges. How do you get the talent? How do you keep the talent? How do you keep them up to date? So all those things are relevant problems around it.
It occurs to me, I'm a lawyer, so I'm trained to be a cynic. It's sort of what comes with me. And I've been in this business for a little over 40 years, and I've never seen an industry, and obviously this is not all I do, I represent other industries as well, but this particular industry, I've never seen an industry that is so into reinventing itself every year. I mean, it's constantly looking to reinvent itself. And very often, the reinventions are really just variations of the past reinventions. And in-housing is one that I have a pretty cynical response to say, this is nothing new. Agencies and advertisers have gone in and out house all the time. They've loaned people. When they couldn't get the talent inside, they borrow them from their agencies. And it's a system that has historically worked. But whatever the headline is, when something occurs, it suddenly becomes the new normal, and people seem to think that it's a bigger situation than, in my view, it is. I mean, there are others that are new and really important, like we've talked about in the reaching your consumer today and the data. But before we get to Q&A, let me ask each of you a simple question. Looking at the landscape today of working in this complicated ecosystem and reaching your ultimate goal, the consumer, are you an optimist or are you a pessimist on what you think the next few years hold for Volvo?
I'm optimist by nature, so of course I'm an optimist. I think that we have some great challenges that are coming from a lot of newcomers of the ecosystem that are sort of challenging the old mentality and the old brands, and they are connecting to values of consumers, and they have a whole bunch of lists that they're going to do and tap into. So we need to, as a brand, start thinking in a different way of how can we provide benefits to the consumers in a new way that we haven't thought of in the past, and that will give the trust back to us, because we will stand for something, and hopefully we will be able to move faster than, let's say, government. That's my future optimism.
Well, I would definitely agree with you on the optimism, because I am an optimist by nature as well. Fundamentally, in terms of when you look at the brand and the consumer, that's just the trust that you've established and whether they trust you or not. And the long term, those brands who are able to create and maintain trust between the consumer and themselves will win. And how they win that will become public, and others will follow. So I think ultimately, down the line, there will be ways of creating that trust again and maintaining that trust. in terms of other parts of the relationships between the agency and the advertiser and also the media owner, I think that trading model is bound to change. It's changed many, many times in my career. And I think down the line they will find that somewhere where it will balance itself out.
Sarah?
Oh, I'm an optimist. Always an optimist. You have to be, don't you, in this industry?
You do.
Surely. We haven't got a future unless we're optimistic about it. But, you know, I mean, there are a number of different initiatives underway. You know, I mean, consumers are annoyed with advertising at the moment, but I think, you know, fundamentally they still understand why advertising needs to be there, but we need to do a better job of making sure that the advertising we're targeting to them is more relevant to them. But I mean, you know, and there are a number of those initiatives such as Coalition for Better Ads, IAB standards, you know, that, and lots of other initiatives that, you know, are starting to see some momentum this way. You know, I appeal to this room, you know, any advertiser agency isn't on board with these initiatives, get on board with them now, because, you know, unless we do, as I say, you know, we are just, you know, we're dead in the water. So, you know, we need to improve the digital ecosystem of which we all operate in and survive with.
Yeah, I think that to your point, Sarah, and getting involved, I am cautiously optimistic, and that's about as optimistic as I can ever be for what I do. But I'm cautiously optimistic because I see in the background the regulators, and I always worry about them. And one of the things that I think is true today is that the digital morass we find ourselves in is because the industry didn't get involved earlier on. And as a result, we now have the regulators, whether it's GDPR or the CCPA in the United States or elsewhere, coming in. So there is an opportunity here, but it's going to require a really focused effort by the industry and all the parts of the industry to step into that debate more aggressively and openly than they have in the past. Otherwise, my cautious optimism will turn to pessimism, because the last thing you want is regulation. Facebook suggested the other day that what is needed in the internet is global regulation. That would mean, in theory, that the UN Charter and the UN will run the internet. If that's what you want, that's what you'll get. And when major platforms are sort of suggesting that as a solution, that's a huge challenge for everybody in the ecosystem to step and say, wait a minute, we can do this with self-regulation. And self-regulation through all the associations and the efforts has been incredibly successful in this industry. So, you know, I echo Sarah's point, get involved, step in, because it's really necessary for people to be leaning in right now more than ever before. Jeremy, do we have any time for questions, or are we run out of time?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Does anyone have any questions out there? I'm coming round, Martin, hold on.
Thank you. As this is about restoring trust, specifically to you, Sarah, and you, Cecilia, I learned this morning to be a little bolder, so I hope you don't mind the question. From what you guys said, I don't hear that you think that there's much of a trust issue, much less that it's being restored right now. I'd like to hear it from you. Do you feel it's an issue?
Have you not listened to what I've said for the last 10 minutes?
No, I did, but I thought you talked a lot about trust between brands and consumers.
Yeah.
And I think, at least the way that I understand this issue, and Doug, what you do with the Trust Summit, it's very much between advertisers and agencies, is it not?
I think it's broader than that. I know it's not just between advertisers and agencies, and you know, as I say, I fundamentally disagree. You know, some advertisers might have an issue of trust with their agencies. You know,
But as an industry, it's not a thing.
Well, I don't know. I don't talk for the industry, but you know, I talk. You know, but at the end of the day, I know consumers are. You know, consumer trust in advertising is being significantly eroded, and we need to do something about that. You know, that is not debatable. You know, ask any consumer out there. You know, in terms of what they think of advertising today and how the quality can be improved in terms of the job we're doing, and they will all have a point of view on it.
I must say that consumers are a bit brutal. You have less than 2 seconds to get their interest, otherwise they would just scroll by you on social media. So of course we have a trust issue that, or it's not even that, they ignore you. If you're not interesting enough, you're not relevant enough, they would completely ignore you. So it's not even about trust. But in order to get to be relevant, in order to build trust, you need to tap through their emotions, and hopefully they will start listening to you, and then you can start building on that trust.
If we think about I guess this is on. If we think about efforts that the industry, and I'll call it media owners, agencies, marketers have had historically at trying to fix this problem, the track record of success, let's just say it's not great. There was a famous, like, they were trying to fix contracts in the US and it turned into a massive, I won't even say the word. What do we have to do differently? Like, what's the hope that we're gonna behave differently and all gonna get together and get on the same wavelength? How is this just not another session of trying to pull people together that have no interest in being pulled together?
We don't, that's a great question. We don't know. All we know is that what the ANA is trying to do, and they tried to do 3 years ago and it fell apart. You can blame anybody who walked out of the room as to who really walked out of that room. But the point being that we've been fighting now for 3 years as an industry and blaming everybody but ourselves. And it's like the old Pogo cartoon. I have looked in the mirror and the enemy is me. And what we're trying to say in this Trust Consortium today is the latest effort. And we're hoping it will work because we're going to open a tent and the ANA is saying, come on in if you want to have a serious conversation. If you don't, please don't come in here. But let's see if we can come to a serious result. At the Trust Summit, some of you attended the Trust Summit in New York last week. We had some folks from agencies, from 3 of the major agencies were there, major consultants, about 50 brands. So the dialogue began. And it may fall flat in its face. I've seen that enough times. We've all seen that enough times. But maybe, particularly with sort of the cloud that's over us right now that people don't like to talk about, but is the FBI investigation. It's a very serious investigation by a very scary organization. And they have subpoenaed executives, they have subpoenaed brands, they have subpoenaed media owners. It's not a small investigation. If we just want to sort of ignore that cloud and do nothing and let inertia keep us where we are, I can guarantee, as someone who's worked with organizations like that in my career, that's a big mistake.
I guess that's my point of, like, what's the evidence that we're going to actually make progress this time?
So can I take it from a slightly different angle to answer your question? So we in Unilever talk about something, trust and verify. And what we mean by that actually is, being able to trust and then actually audit what's done. So be that third-party verification through brand safety, through viewability, be that through to better transparency in terms of the whole supply chain so that you can basically audit from end to end in the supply chain. That is what is going to get to the heart of the issue and that's going to solve the issue. But you have to trust and verify.
To further Sarah's comment, I like to analogize this. Think of a prize fight, with in terms of the one that's the most focused, the agency relationship. And we have the agency in one corner, and the advertiser in another. And we've gone through, pick the number of rounds. And it's a draw. We bloodied each other up sufficiently that it's a draw. And like a prize fight in the end, they hug each other. So we need to hug. We need to get together in the middle of that with all the blood all over ourselves and say, now we don't want a rematch of this. We don't want to come back into the ring. Maybe that'll be the motivation. Maybe it won't. But trust and verify, we're seeing more acceptance from the brand side of the ecosystem saying, okay, we get it that you need to verify, so let's talk about that. In the past, that was not a subject that would get much traction. So we're seeing some progress. Whether it'll work, time will tell.
If I can take it from a slightly different angle then, I think the media agencies is full of thousands of professionals who work really, really hard for their clients. And quite often they get to blame for various trust issues, various failures in terms of the commercial transaction. And it's largely the advertiser that forced the agencies to find out alternative ways of making money. So when you look at the core of this untransparent transaction that we all call media transactions, you need to go to the root of it and say, okay, why is this untransparent? And then deal with it. But that means pay your agencies properly, right? And if you pay your agencies properly, why should they go and find? Then you can say, okay, I'm paying you fairly. Now you can no longer have untransparent transactions. So it's only through that can you actually hope that the industry will come back to what it was like in the early 90s when I started.
That's part of that serious conversation. The advertiser has to take some responsibility here too.
I mean, we do some media benchmarking from time to time, and people say, are you doing that because you don't have trust? No, it's a way to verify what we do trust each other, and you get a proof back saying, listen, we're actually doing a good job here. So I wouldn't say it's a proof of distrust. It's a way of proving that we are trusting each other and we're doing a good job together. As to your point, if we're paying them rightly, they will do a good job for us.
Tom, last question?
Yeah. I was about to ask you, actually, if you could share some of the perspective about the FBI investigation. I know you know how to navigate that very carefully, right, to avoid getting someone in trouble. But at because I was at the summit last week, as Rob was as well, right? We were at the summit on part of the consortium. It's an incredible initiative, and it's wonderful. It has the ANA's mandate, and it has Reed Smith as a kind of objective party welcoming everybody in, and I think it's a good chance. Like there's no guarantee, but it's engineered in the right way. And it was great that we had some agency leadership. Maybe not enough, but that's next stage. That's another kind of next step forward. And there was some important agency leadership there who heard the message, and then subsequent conversations have been like, let's see where we can go with this. But a couple of people during the day, it might have been you at the beginning, I think, in your opening words, and then Suzanne Vranica from the Wall Street Journal, I think, also mentioned this as well, is that when the FBI subpoenas or subsequent investigations play themselves out, that will be a significant point in time, right? Because we will know something, right? And I think the sentiment was that is going to be a catalyst for change. We got the sentiment, we've got goodwill in the room, but do you agree that like we're waiting for that as a critical moment?
It's a kind of a Hobson's choice. Neither is the better choice. The ANA, the FBI rather, will conclude this investigation at some point. We don't know when. They'll conclude it in one of two ways. They'll issue a dozen or so indictments and bring people before the criminal court, or they'll just go away. They won't come out in a grandiose announcement that we closed this investigation. They may say something that gives you that indication, but one of those two things are going to happen. If the hope is that they're just going to go away and you just wait, that will be a cataclysmic moment if they go the other way, if they start to indict people. On the other hand, if you take the viewpoint that, all right, we're going to plan for the worst here, and we're going to, as agencies and brands and ecosystem participants and media owners are part of this issue as well, we're going to take a serious look, a serious conversation, and ultimately try to fix this problem before it's fixed, because people are going to prison. That happened in the bidding system. In bidding, there was an indictments, and people from Gray went to jail back in 2002, I think it was, and that had a sea change in the way bidding was done in production. But that shouldn't have taken people going to jail to make that change. So, we either plan smartly now or just wait. That's your choice.
Okay, thank you very much, panelists. I'm going to get in trouble with everyone, but that was a wonderful discussion, a good debate. Thank you, Doug, Sarah, Hasan, and Cecilia.